Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and it is a real honor to be participating in this meeting and learning from you and hearing from your experiences. And this panel will in fact focus on intergenerational relations and care, which is a very important topic, in particular in light of the demographic changes we have discussed earlier. And I just want to remind everyone that Asia Pacific is at the forefront of this mega trend. It's a global, but more so a regional megatrend. It's very rapid in Asia Pacific. And as we heard, countries are becoming old before they become rich. So it's an issue we have to address. Now, more than 1 in 3 persons in Asia and the Pacific is already living in a country that is estimated to have experienced or have reached a population peak, which means from there on, populations are going to decline. And many more countries will join this group within the next 20 years or so. What it means is we have to shift in the demographic structures. With fewer young people, we have still a growing working age population, and of course, a rapid increase in numbers and percentages of older persons. Now, all of this, of course, has a gender dimension, and we already addressed some of this. But in particular, when it comes to care, gender is very important. ESCAP has done some research on national time transfer accounts, in fact, which look at economic flows over the work week by gender, and age, and we show clearly that older persons are not necessarily net recipients of care. In fact, they're often the net providers, and it's often the older women that are providing this care to the children, to the grandchildren, as well as other older family members. So with that in mind, we look forward to hearing from the experts in this field with a focus on Asia and the Pacific. And I have the honor to introduce the panelists. I would first like to introduce Mrs. Sei-Yen Teng, Chief Caregiving Initiatives Agency for Integrated Care, Singapore. I would also like to introduce Mrs. Angelique Chang, Center for Aging Research, Duke NUS in Singapore. I would also like to welcome online Professor Adeline Comas-Herrera, London School of Economics. We just listened to your lecture. Thank you very much. And of course, Professor Shen Ke from Fudan University in China. We have a few questions, and I would like to start out with posing my first question to Professor Shen Ke. It seems that societies have to strike a balance between looking after older persons, but also supporting their independence. And China is very advanced in population aging, and we would like to hear from you what the experiences are. Are there any good practices, anything we can learn in terms of striking the right balance when it comes to caregiving in China?
Yeah, thank you, Sabina, for your great question. And we do see that China has aged very fast, and the share of the older adults above the age of 65 years old in China has surpassed 15%. So that means that China has entered the aged society and will become the super aged society in the next 20 years. And if you look at intergenerational support in the context of Asia and also in the context of China, you can see this very strong reciprocal nature. So on the one hand, you can see like the children, they provide very important financial support and also psychological support for their older parents, especially in the countryside. Like in 2020, if you look at the oldest old in the countryside, over 70% of their income is actually coming from their children. Okay, so children still provide very essential support for their parents. But on the other hand, also you see that the older parents provide very vital assistance for their children, especially for their daughters in grandchild care and also in domestic work. Just as Sabine mentioned, there is this gender pattern. The older women have made great contributions for the family. So in this case, like for the government, we have to strike a balance. On the one hand, we have to amplify the benefits of intergenerational support, but on the other hand, we should also avoid the issue of overdependence. So like in the case of China, we have some policies and experiences we can share. One is back in 2020, but back in 2021, the central authority has published a general guideline principle that encouraged the children to live close to their older parents. Just as Professor Low mentioned this morning, like a bowl of subsistence is the preferred living arrangement for mainland China and also for Hong Kong of China and many Asian societies. So like after this general principles, you can see some of the cities in China, they actually brought forward these incentive measures, like one city in Hunan province. If the children buy the apartment in the same neighborhood or same community with their parents, so they can enjoy some discounts. So in this case, they can intensify the intergenerational exchange, but without compromising like privacy and independence. And the second practice is I noticed that there is a better integration of the older people in the family-friendly activities. Like in Shanghai, in the recent years, you can see the schools and the communities, they have brought forward very diversified family-friendly activities. Usually like the parent-children bonding activities like the urban hiking, adventures like theater shows, and also co-reading, all kinds of these activities. So initially, they only include like parents and also the young kids. But recently, you can see they also invite the grandparents to join in these programs. So it could be a combination of the grandparents and the grandchildren, and could be a combination of the 3 generations, and also could be a combination of the grandparents and their middle-aged like children. So in this case, this can foster like mutual understanding. For older adults, they can feel they are acknowledged by the society, by the community, and also by the family members. And for the middle-aged adults and also the children, they can see how active these 60s and 70s they could be, okay, and also like how interactive they can play activities together. And the third policy is also like practice in many of the cities in China, that is so-called time banking system. Okay. So this is more like this community-based mutual aid system. Essentially this is younger older adults caring for the oldest old. So the younger older adults can get some credits, time credits, if they offer this kind of help for the oldest old. And when they get very old, reach like the age of 80s, these credits could be redeemed for the equivalent service. So this could also increase like the sense of fulfillment of the older adults and can also solve the shortage of the care workers in China. So here are some like practice I want to share with you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and for highlighting these good practices, living close to family members, promoting family-friendly activities, learning by example, watching, what members of the family do, how they interact. I think these are wonderful examples from China. I would now like to turn to Singapore. And I know you have been working on integrated care systems. I also know that there are some new initiatives you're promoting. So please tell us more about it.
So thank you so much, Sabine. From the AIC survey among local caregivers, we found that care is largely intergenerational, with over 60% looking after family members of a different age group. Meaning to say children looking after children, their parents or in-laws. I think it's encouraging to see this intergenerational approach of care support. But I think the idea of a care circle of family and friends coming together as a unit, as opposed to a primary caregiver really taking on the sole support for a care recipient, is something that we want to look forward to and really nudge forward. I think that at the end of the day, this care circle should be supported by really an ecosystem of formal care services and as well as community. I think among us, there are a lot of health and social care professionals here. We tend to actually refer to primary caregiver. We tend to, right, in our conversations and communications. I'm thinking whether is it time for us to really reframe this kind of communication, because it does signal and perpetuate a certain thought, right, that caregiving is something that you do by yourself, you and you alone. And then we miss out on the opportunity to be relying and leveraging on our own circle of networks that can be around us, be it neighbors, your church friends, relatives, and all. I think that's something for us to take back and maybe something we can discuss a little bit more. The other thing about the intergeneration approach is quite aligned to what AIC is looking at in terms of the dyadic approach. Meaning to say, because for AIC, we work with partners like Tsao and all, we look at providing the care services for the person requiring care. It's probably not so systematic that we, at the same time, look out for the caregivers or the care partners who's supporting that loved one. So is that something that we can do a bit more systematically? For example, by introducing a caregiver needs a simple tool, right, to pick out what is it that our caregivers may need help with. And then in addition to providing and supporting the care recipient, can we then turn our attention as well to providing quick tips, support, and resources to our caregivers is something that AIC is looking at to roll out in the next year or so. The other thing that we realized that when we spoke to our caregivers during the survey, more than 50% of the caregivers don't think that they're caregivers. I'm not sure whether we think that's something that we should be concerned about. But what brings to mind is that if they don't think that they're a caregiver, likely they may not maybe feel the need for them to be supported. They do the best they can because as good children, good daughter-in-law, whatsoever. So they miss out on the opportunity to be tapping on resources and schemes that are available there. So that's one. Secondly is the whole gender thing. We thought that we wanted to introduce and make more awareness, increase awareness that as a caregiver, your care and support might be invisible. You might not see that you're doing something, but indeed, in your own space, there's a lot that the caregivers are providing for their loved ones. In our campaign videos, we were quite deliberate to pick out people, right? Because usually when you look at caregivers, you think of 40-year-old women, right, supporting their mother or their mother-in-law. So we were quite deliberate to pick out a young caregiver, someone like a grandchild's son looking after the dad or whatsoever, a husband looking after a wife, because that's important to really switch the narrative. I will go on in terms of other schemes, but I want to give the time. But maybe two more things I wanted to highlight. We know that for caregivers, in Singapore especially, it's not easy to navigate the health and social. Let's be honest, okay? So we often have a lot of resources out there, but we don't know where to start. So that's something that AIC worked with GovTech and PSD to come up with this care recommender that is online. The whole idea is for the caregivers to quickly just log in the existing needs that their loved one is having, and with that, the recommender is going to share schemes and services that are most perhaps appropriate at this point in time. So the whole idea is to really shrink and narrow down and target the just-in-time services that might be helpful. So I will stop here at this time. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you very much. And thank you in particular for bringing our attention to the caregiver and actually also helping us to start questioning, is there a primary caregiver or should we think about it differently? Talking about the needs and possible tools, but also communication information that might be very much a need to provide more background on what is needed to provide care and what resources are out there. Thank you very much for those experiences from Singapore. We now come also again to Singapore. Professor Chan, I know you have worked on the sandwich generation and looked at how middle-aged adults are facing challenges, looking after younger family members, children, but also older persons in the family. How are they coping and what have you learned?
Thank you very much. I had a couple of slides. I don't know if we're going to be able to get them up and going, but while we wait for that, I just wanted to make a few comments. On the way here, I was thinking back in 1999 when I first met Marianne. She was running a conference on aging and gender.
And we talked about caregiving, and 25% of caregivers were unmarried women. And I don't think the situation has changed a lot in terms of gender differences in caregivers, but what has changed is the total fertility rate. In Singapore in particular, it's now under 1, 0.94. I hope I got that right, or 97. And then in South Korea, it's even worse. So I think that there are children who are willing to care, but there's not enough of them. And in Singapore, we are in a unique situation where we can hire migrant domestic workers. Second point, before I get to the slides, is intergenerational transfers. Dr. Abhijit Visaria, who's in the room, who I used to work with, we looked at data from 1999 and 2015, and we found in 1999 that financial transfers in Singapore were going from children to older persons. But in 2015, it had flipped, and now the financial transfers are going from older parents to children. So things are very much changing in this context. But going back to your point about caregiver needs assessment, that's what I'm going to talk about in these 2 slides. So this is data which my colleague, Dr. Rahul Malhotra and Dr. Abhijit also contributed to this paper. It's data collected on caregivers over time. So normally when we collect data on caregivers' needs and their assessments of their own needs, we do it at one time point, but this was done over a period of time. So this is collapsed into one graph that shows 4 different profiles of caregivers. And the point that I'm going to make in these 2 slides is that there are burdens to caregiving, but there are also benefits. The takeaway I'd like you to take from this particular slide is if you look at the x-axis, you will see that the variables include disturbed schedule and poor health, lack of family support, lack of finances, and then you have 3 variables on caregiver esteem, self-affirmation, and outlook in life. And the black line, the bold line, shows you caregivers who are dissatisfied. And what I'd like you to note is that they have the lowest caregiver esteem, self-affirmation, and outlook in life. And so if we want to increase the positive aspects of caregiving, I think we need to target programs that enhance caregiver self-esteem and self-affirmation, like you mentioned about the recognition of being a caregiver and getting the help that you need. So the next slide, findings from a study that we did with Tsao Foundation, funded by Temasek Foundation, where we actually interviewed caregivers qualitatively, and we shared what are the positive aspects across all of these different archetypes. People felt positive about caregiving when they said things like they felt fulfilled, they were reciprocating the past care they received, they thought they were being a role model to future generations, and they themselves were gaining knowledge and perspective on aging. Remember, caregivers on average in Singapore are 54-year-old women. But the burden still persists, especially when support is lacking, when caregiving becomes very isolating, when the care recipient needs outweigh their own. However, very intensive caregivers may cope through spiritual reframing. That seemed to be a very important thing. And bolstering the positive experience really was coming back to that sense of achievement and competence, encouragement from family, seeing the care recipient get better, and reframing caregiving as a meaningful or spiritual journey. So I think Paul's remit was to provide some Singapore data, so I'll stop here and then open up for discussion.
Thank you very much. And I think that's another important perspective to focus on the burden, but also the opportunities and the benefits to caregivers. Thank you for sharing those experiences from Singapore. I would now like to come to Professor Comas Herrera. We already heard from you earlier, and I know you're an expert on many of these issues from a global perspective. We heard from Singapore and China. Maybe you can pick up on some of the issues that were already raised by our panelists here and add from your global perspective to long-term care and how you see this topic develop, especially in light of the expected demographic changes. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much. And sorry I'm not here in person, but it's great to be able to participate virtually. Technology is a great thing. I mentioned a little bit this issue of the number of hours that people are providing care, and I was very interested to hear from Professor Chan on how people with very intense burdens can do better if they have spiritual support, if they are and if they have a sense of being supported. I think it's a very important consideration to think of care as a collaboration and to move away, as it was said, from this idea of the primary caregiver and to see how you can create a sort of a constellation of care around the person who needs care that can offer support both to them but also to be the primary caregiver. From my point of view, I think we have to think very carefully about the types of caregivers. Are they spouses? Are they offspring? Are there very young people? And we need to consider the financial impact of care very seriously as well. I think for me a particular concern is where people are giving up their employment in order to provide care. We now have quite good studies, longitudinal studies, that show that this is placing particularly women at very high risk of poverty in their old age, and they will themselves then have less resources. So I think we need to watch this phase, especially of the intergenerational care, with great care and understand how to put in place support, ways of identifying particularly women who are at risk of poverty and of bad outcomes, and think about very, very simply just about the number of hours of care they're providing, be able to estimate that and be able to then use that to help us identify this profile of carers at risk. And in terms of what can we do about that, I find it very interesting to see how much Japan has invested in daycare, because daycare has a really good advantage compared to other forms of care at home, in the sense that you can provide it for quite a few hours during the day, and that can be quite compatible with primary caregiver having a job, while the person that they provide care for is in a good place where they're having a lot of physical activities, social stimulation, and even some other therapies that can help them in their health. So I think that we need to be strategic when we look to the future. We need to consider that we will have this demographic challenge, and that maybe these examples of one-to-one care at home are not necessarily the best place to go, and that there is a space between that and institutions, which are, of course, not something that most people would like to do, although they also have their place.
Thank you very much for adding those additional points. And in light of the time left, I would like to now turn to some of the questions and also, of course, ask our panelists then to respond accordingly. I see there are a few questions coming in on the particular situation of women, for example, mental health effects of women caregivers, or also how we can support women in terms of continuing to support but not reinforcing stereotypes. I also would like to pick up what we just heard at the regional level, and here speaking for the UN active at the Asia-Pacific level. We see that labor force participation of women is actually in many countries declining. Women cannot shoulder, looking after children and grandchildren, but also then at the same time working in the labor market. So they let go of that. They do not work in the labor market. They focus on the caregiving, and this will, of course, have long-term effects on their well-being in the future, because they will not receive Social Security. They will not have this pension system if there is one in place. So working in the informal labor market will then be often the end result, and that's where they will be if they return to work. So there is a vicious circle here, and so we need to pay attention to the situation of women. With that in mind, mental health impacts, and also how can we help women perform these functions, but how can we also continue to ensure that they not disqualify themselves in other ways. So who would like to take that on? Any our colleagues from Singapore, maybe?
Sure. Since I'm from the Caregiving and Community Mental Health Division from AIC, I thought I'll just maybe start off by sharing some of the learnings I've observed on the ground. When we spoke to caregivers, something that came up quite clearly was not beyond the care delivery, meaning to say just providing the care and support, right? Was the stress and the tension that some family units may encounter because of the differing opinions about how care can be provided among family members. I think this family dynamics and tension is one thing that we perhaps don't focus so much on, especially in the health sector. I think in Singapore, we are blessed by having migrant domestic workers who take on the most part of what we call the care delivery. Maybe showering the person, providing maybe feeding medicines and so on and so forth. But what we tend to maybe neglect is the fact that caregiving is also like it's a whole family coming together among siblings, among family members, right? There's a need to have conversation about what each other roles are, from the part about financial support, who will bring mom or dad for medical appointments, who's the one who will be thinking about maybe looking at the psychosocial aspect of mom and dad, right? I use maybe my own example. My dad passed on last November, but when he was down with stroke, between myself and my brother, what was very powerful, I felt, was that because I'm in the health industry, so it's quite clear that I will focus on all these appointments and all those, right? And then he will focus about how can I make Dad happy. If he's interested in the char kway teow, I'll think about this Saturday, bring him for his favorite meal. So that kind of, if I may, role division and that kind of understanding that we trust each other's decision-making was very powerful because we don't have to second guess. And I think this may not happen for all family units. And coming back to the point about this tension, this family dynamics, I was just having a chat with Marianne, in fact, during lunchtime. Could we do more in this aspect of having, I'm not sure, workshops or just increasing awareness about this importance of care management? So what we started at AIC is that beyond the care delivery cost, how to change a stoma bag, how do you do showering, can we have modules that speaks quite specifically about having conversations, right, with your loved ones about how do we do care apportioning of roles? How do we have, it's not an easy conversation, especially if the family dynamics was not well in the first place. So these are all something that we've recently started and incorporated into the caregiver training modules, which I think is quite important. And I hope that more of us will start looking at this aspect of this family dimension of caregiving. Yeah.
Thank you very much for sharing that. I will now call on Professor Shanke to also enlighten us a little bit in terms of China's experience with regard to women caregivers, and maybe you can speak to that.
Okay, thank you, Sabina. Yeah, I do agree with you that like in China, over the past 3 decades, we do see that the female labor force participation has been on the decrease at a much faster pace than the decrease of the male labor force participation. But if you look at the time spent in these unpaid work, particularly in caregiving, and as I will show you later on, you can see there was a fast increase in the time spent in these unpaid work. And there is this very strong like gender pattern. So even though like in China, we have this belief or this old saying that raising the son to prepare for the old age, so-called 养儿防老, but actually in reality, it's always the daughter's responsibility to take care of the older parents. And many of the research also show that the older adults with the daughters have the better health and also have the higher life satisfaction than the older adults without the daughters. Okay. And the same for caregiving. You can see that these older women, like in the 50s and the 60s, once they retire, they also became the major responsibility of grandchild care. And they have done much more than the grandfathers. So how can we better acknowledge the contribution of these, like the invisible labor provided by the females, by the working females, by these grandmothers? I think this is very essential for China to think about in the future.
Thank you very much. I see Professor Comas Herrera nodding. Maybe you would like to come in on this as well? Please.
Yes, I do think it's really important to have policies in place to support the labor force participation of women who have caring responsibilities. And that means thinking about the care they provide very carefully. And I mentioned the idea of day centers, but there's also other policies like making sure there's a carer leave available. So if you have to provide care for an amount of time, that you don't lose your job. So in many countries, we now have parental leave when you have a baby, and you still are able to go back to the job that you had before you left, but we don't have that for providing care for our parents, for example. So that is one example of a policy that could help women who maybe for a period of time it makes sense for them to leave their jobs, so they really want to have the opportunity to provide care to their parents because it's something they feel they want to do, but that doesn't make it hard for them to go back to the labor market. There's a lot of evidence from the US and also Germany now that if you give up work and then provide care and then try to come back, it takes almost 5 years to get back to the salary and to the job that you would have had hadn't you left. So there is a labor market penalty even after you finish caring that does make the risk of poverty for women who give up their jobs to provide care much higher. And I think thinking about this compatibility between care and work is a very important policy issue. And when I was hearing about the Singaporean example, I was also thinking of the really important role of care management and how care managers can really help families find a solution that's right for them, but also help structure the care and support around both the person who needs care and around the person who would be the primary caregiver.
Thank you very much, and also for providing a few examples of policies that could be put in place to address some of these challenges. I know that Professor Chan would like also to contribute. Please.
Yeah, I wanted to ask a question actually to our colleague from China. I've always wondered about the one-child policy in China and all those decades of having sons, and how does that impact caregiving? It's not really daughters as much as daughters-in-law, maybe. How does that impact the whole process? Has there been any work looking at that?
Yeah, thank you for your question. So actually, I have not done this research by myself, right? But we see that the social norms have been changing, right? In the past, right, you have this tradition of co-residing with the sons and also the daughter-in-laws. But if you look at like many of the metropolises like Shanghai, you will see there is a higher prevalence of co-residing with the maternal grandmother. Yeah, so because there will be less conflict between the maternal grandmother and also the females in terms of caring for the babies, because they will have like more consensus on that. Yeah.
That's okay. I'm looking at the questions that are coming in, and there are a few questions in particular addressed to you about the time banks you talked about. Can you enlighten us a little bit more on that?
So time banking system was also actually a new practice in China. So this has not been a national practice, but has been piloted in some of the communities, say in Beijing. Like if you offer some support or volunteer services to take care of the oldest old, then you can get some time credits. Okay. So once you also reach the very old age, and if you require this kind of support, and you can transfer these time credits to get the equivalent services from the next generation of the older adults.
And again, thank you very much. There is a question to the Singaporean colleagues regarding the time banks. Is this a model that you could see could be adopted here?
I do think that the concept is an attractive one, and I've heard about perhaps more very localized experiences that I don't think it's a largely scaled observation that I've seen, but I've heard in a specific. This one comes from a son who's taking care of his dad who has got dementia, right? And within his housing block, what he did was to mobilize his neighbors to look out for his dad. Because the dad loves to sing and play the piano, so he will then engage the neighbors to come in and really be engaging him in a meaningful way. And in return, what he does was that he will then help his neighbor with fixing of lights and all those. So it's not something like a very concrete time banking kind of project, but I think it's the power of community networks, right? And I think that's the whole idea that is organic. It can take many shape and form, right? It could be maybe perhaps something very structured whereby you say, I put in 2 hours and I expect 2 hours back. Or it could be something that is more free and organic is the word, right? That we extend a helping hand to each other. I wanted to touch on the topic of self-care for caregiving. So switch the conversation a little bit. Something I've observed again is that in the survey, we have heard that caregivers say that they think that self-care is very important. More than 80% of them will say so. But yet when asked about whether do they do regular self-care, I think only 30% will say that they take regular self-care breaks and all. I wonder, of course, the infrastructure can be improved. I think we acknowledge that there could be more perhaps respite services that's available, or sometimes it's really the mindset about feeling that guilt and that discomfort of leaving their loved one with someone that I may not be very familiar with and all. So I'm not sure. I think this one I'm just opening up for this topic of self-care and how can we look at it in a more systematic way and encourage as well. Yeah.
Thank you. And thank you for raising that issue. I see, Professor from the London School of Economics, you're nodding as well. Can you tell us a little bit about this perspective, self-care, maybe from the global perspective also, or European experiences?
I'm actually thinking of a research project we've just done with where we are interviewing carers of people with dementia. And we did have an example of somebody complaining that they already were very busy and they were told that on top of that, they should do self-care. And they were thinking that that was like an additional task that they were expecting to do. And that's why I was nodding, but also thinking more seriously that self-care requires to have a bit of time and space, and we need to think about how to support carers in finding that time and space for themselves. And that will often require that somebody comes and sits maybe with the person that you're taking care of. So maybe you can go and do some Tai Chi or, and leave the house and do something different. And I recently, part of this project, we also interviewed somebody who was saying, well, I pay this woman, and when she comes, I don't want her to do anything in my house, and I don't want her to provide any personal care to my husband because I don't trust her. But they can sit together and watch the TV together while I go out. And I thought that was a really interesting example of not wanting to give up the care role to a stranger, but actually accepting the fact that allowed her to leave the house with peace of mind. And this type of intervention, of this type of respite that may not be taking the person out, but maybe somebody comes in and does the sitting for a couple of hours, is a really important way of finding this space for self-care that can take, of course, many different forms depending on the preferences of the carer.
Thank you. Thank you for raising that and open our eyes towards the different dimensions of self-care. Professor Chan, you want to contribute, please?
Yeah, I had a question about the Singapore situation. Actually, we have tried respite care programs a few times, and then it doesn't seem to work. Do you have any insights into, is it a trust issue or?
I think there's multiple factors. I wanted to really raise up about this. I think we tried the night respite service. Yeah. The how it originated was to really target caregivers who are caring for loved ones with dementia with sundowning. Meaning to say, at night the behaviors they become agitated and restless. And for these caregivers, because they've been at work for the whole day, and at night they just need a good rest, sleep, right? But yet their loved ones presents with these symptoms. So with that in mind, we looked at overseas experiences and we thought, hey, let's try this night respite program, and we rolled that out. With the idea, we partner with some of the nursing homes, whereby the loved ones can drop the caregiver can drop their loved ones there around 7 p.m. after work, right? Then the care staff will be taking care of the loved ones for overnight. And the next morning, you pick them up and goes back home. And I was quite excited that I pushed this through, right? But the utilization was dismal. The utilization was very poor. So I was wondering what went wrong, right? Why is it that I've heard so much about the caregivers' feedback? We pushed through, got funding, got partners to come along, but yet nobody signed up for it. It's not nobody, but a few people signed up for it. Then what we realized was, so it's true, it's a trust issue, right? The other one was, as a caregiver, you expect me to drop my loved one, come back, go pick up, and come back. It just doesn't seem to make sense for the caregivers, right? Because I need to travel, even though transport was provided. But the whole idea is that it's not so seamless as I thought it would be. Then we actually really talk to the caregivers, and they say, if it seems like having a migrant domestic worker seems to solve the issue for me once I get the help. Our learnings was that we took back and we say, okay, we tried, we have some useful learning. Let's reorganize our thoughts about what it means to have respite. Yeah. So we realized that because I think this whole idea of respite is sometimes new to someone, and policy owners and ourselves, sometimes we have different perspective. Actually, the caregivers say that so long as you can provide me with a center or a service or someone coming to my house, so that exactly like what was shared, right? That it's good enough. I don't need to call to have a specific respite. So long as you have someone to take over the caregiving, the care delivery for that 4 hours, is good enough, right? So that was our learning. So you don't have to call it a respite program. So with that in mind, then we thought, okay, maybe AIC, instead of creating new programs, can we consolidate? Can we make center-based services a bit more streamlined across? And we have centers who are also opening their centers during the weekends, right? And that seemed to be a more viable approach for caregivers. In fact, last Saturday, we just had an open house event at one of the senior care center. They provide Saturday and weekend services, and it was full. We were excited, right? So hence reframing it that it must be called respite service versus actually is having more accessible support for the care recipient is good enough, was our learning. Thanks.
Thank you, and also for sharing that how you came to this, to these insights in terms of testing something and realizing it's not working, but finding a solution, and apparently very successful now. There have been a question, but I also wonder if anyone else from the panel would like to respond to this. The technology, the effect of technology on caregiving can this be used in some way that is helpful to the caregivers? What are your experiences? Are there any limitations you see? Technology, caregiving, older persons aging. Anyone on this? Experience of technology and using technology?
I think earlier I mentioned about the care service recommender was one of this simple way of making services and information more bite-sized for the caregivers was one such thing. Of course, among our community care partners, we do know that they do tap on maybe sensors in some of the rental housing in order to find out if the person has actually had a fall and can address it quite quickly. So I think these are all some of this. I think technology it must be inbuilt together with some programming, because the technology on itself probably is limited. But how does it then relate to having volunteers to look out, and when there's a fall happening, there's someone to respond? I think these are some of the observations we have seen in the newer apartments that come along that's connected with the social service agency that's close to them.
Okay, thank you. And I see Professor Comas Herrera also nodding on this. May I ask you to maybe respond?
Yeah, I think technology has a lot to offer. So from just thinking from the point of view of the formal caregivers, it can help them with note taking, with not having to spend all the time typing things, and maybe just recording the notes of how things went, any incidents. Yeah, I think it can also help. It's very interesting to hear about this care recommender idea. I think that's a great approach. I've heard also of in the Netherlands of a system that I think is really interesting and links a bit to the time bank and mobilization of the neighborhood discussion we had before. It's something called the circles of care, or precautionary circles, where you link the caregiver and the person who needs care are linked with people in their neighborhood who are willing to step in and support if needed through technology, through a simple app. So I think there's a lot of very good potential out there. I still think that even if we invest a lot in robots, we'll still need humans to be providing the care. And while I really appreciate the very important advances in sensors and so on, what they often do is to detect the need for a human to take action. So I think they can help us reduce unmet needs. And by detecting things that otherwise we might miss, but it also means that we do need to send a human to respond to any incident that has been detected. So we need to always think that this is going to be a collaboration between humans and technology, and making the technology works for us rather than take over.
No, thank you for pointing that out, and also the limitations and the role humans have. Professor Shen Ke from China, I think you have experience in this topic as well. Would you like to share some of this?
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I would say like smart elder care like facilities will be a very booming industry, very promising industry. Like you can see these like fall detection sensors and also the robot helpers. So that will be the future, and what be a solution for the lack of the caregivers in the future. But there are also two issues I just noticed. I went to visit one rural nursing homes in Zhejiang province, and we see that these nursing homes also have these like smart facilities, like with the assistance of the Bureau of Civil Affairs and also with the donation of the enterprises. But the thing is that the nursing staff in these nursing homes, they don't know how to use this. So it just became the waste of the money. And the second one is like for those elders who are living at home, we have to offer them more trainings to improve their digital literacy, how they can use this and how they can like better make use of these facilities. I think these are the two issues we have to conquer. Thank you.
Thank you very much. In light of the few minutes left, I would like to give all panelists 1 or 2 minutes to provide some concluding remarks, particularly with a view to policy recommendations. If you were to make a pitch to a policymaker and have 1 minute to make a case for what you think is important in improving care situations and in strengthening the role of women in particular in this without overburdening them, what would you say given your experiences? May I ask maybe Professor Chan to go first?
All right. Quick thinking. Okay. I think as a policy, to talk to a policymaker, I would say the work-life balance issue would be most important. So to help both men and women be caregivers, and yeah, that would be my recommendation. Yeah.
I think like for the government, they should better acknowledge the economic contributions of the caregivers, particularly the female caregivers, because even though they are engaged in these unpaid work, but they are saving the societal resources.
I think I'll echo what you mentioned since I've been, I think my work involves about the care and services, but the part about the recognition of the informal care and the time taken off and the sacrifices they made, I think that's an area that we should do more to acknowledge that, yeah.
Thank you. And yes, maybe also with a focus on maybe less developed countries, that are not so privileged in many ways. In Asia Pacific, what can we recommend? May I ask our professor from the London School of Economics to maybe also respond to that aspect?
I was going to suggest first something that's not really very applicable yet, I think, to many countries that are in the process of economic development and growth, which was that recognizing, but I think would work for Singapore, which is the recognizing the family care, especially these carers who are giving up work and who are not, or are struggling to combine work and care, making sure that their social insurance contributions and pensions are being topped up while they're providing care, and this would require some sort of financial support from government, but it'd be a recognition that they are doing a job and they are making a very important contribution to our society. So making sure that they're not penalized in terms of their future pensions and entitlement to services because they're giving care, I think is very important. Second is make work and care compatible, so people don't actually have to leave their jobs, but they have the choice, but they don't have to. And then, thinking about countries where maybe there are less resources. From my point of view, what's really essential is that people understand well the needs of the person that they're providing care to. And for that, I'm thinking of the cases of people with dementia quite often for family caregivers in especially countries where dementia is not very well understood, have additional challenges because of that. And I think having a good support from community health workers, for example, in understanding the situation, the health condition of the person they're providing care to, can make a very big difference. And as well, giving them some ways of finding broader support from their community, so we move away from this single person taking all the burden, and we can help them spread the load with other people, but which maybe within the family or maybe volunteers.
Thank you very much, and also for raising the issue faced by countries that are not so highly developed and how they can address some of these challenges. With that, we want to conclude. I would like all participants to give a round of applause to our panelists. And I now hand over to the MC, I think, for guiding us.